Welcome to Meet at the Well, a podcast for the weary, the misfits, and those living in the hard middle, too sacred for the secular, too secular for the sacred. My painful journey has led me to the intersection of literature, theology, and effective sciences, not by design, but by necessity. I'm your host, Mariana, a Cuban-American writer, poet, visual storyteller, living in the in-between. I come from a lineage marked by survival and silence, by resilience and rupture, grief, motherhood, loss, and a hunger to make meaning in the mess have shaped me. And somewhere along the way, I realized the lines we draw between the sacred and the secular are thinner than we think. Language, story, emotion, they don't belong to one world or the other. They belong to the human heart. Here at Meet at the Well, I'm blurring those lines one word at a time. This space was born for those who live in the gaps. For the mothers without the tools to emotionally regulate, but still showing up. For the men and women who don't fit the boxes they were handed. For the Christians struggling to hold both mental and spiritual health without shame. For the curious. For trauma survivors who've been made to feel like their very life is a crime and that survival itself demands an apology. Rooted in what I call Woman at the Well Theology, this podcast isn't here to give you all the answers. It's here to create a space for raw, honest conversations about faith, belonging, and questions that don't always resolve neatly. Here, we break barriers, not each other. And if your heart has been searching for a place to wrestle, to rest, and to be seen in the in-between, you've found it. Today's episode is called Woman at the Well and Why It Matters Today. Before we step into today's story, let's pause for a moment and look at the well itself. At the heart of this episode is a woman with a story, one that wouldn't have been honored in her culture or in ours. A woman whose life would have made her invisible. Someone whose reputation should have silenced her. And yet, it is through her story that an entire village finds its way to the well. That's the miracle. Not a blinding sign from heaven, not fire falling from the sky, but the radical transformation of a woman who dared to speak, without shame, about a man who told her everything she had ever done. And the village listened. This is the power of story. This is the power of being seen. Let's step into it together, because at the heart of it, we are all thirsty. Thirsty for truth that doesn't shame, thirsty for belonging that doesn't break us, thirsty for a love that knows the whole story and stays. So come to the well, bring your thirst, you are welcome here. Today's episode is called The Woman at the Well and Why It Matters Today. Let's go back to Jacob's well in John 4, where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman in the heat of the day. Their conversation is the longest recorded dialogue Jesus has with anyone in the New Testament. Longer than any conversation with Peter or Mary or even the Pharisees. And it happens with someone who wasn't supposed to matter. You see, Samaritans were considered unclean, products of intermarriage, theological confusion, and generational resentment. This woman, in particular, comes to the well alone during the hottest hour. That tells us something. She's isolated, perhaps by shame, perhaps by survival. Two cultures divided by centuries of hostility, racial, religious, and historical. Samaritans were considered impure, and women didn't hold much social weight, let alone women like her with a complicated past. And yet, Jesus goes there. He doesn't avoid Samaria. He doesn't avoid her. In fact, he waits for her, and he does this while his disciples are away. Why? Because sometimes the presence of people, even well-meaning ones, can make hard conversations impossible. Jesus creates space, relationship equity, safety. He doesn't start with theology. He starts with thirst. Will you give me a drink? And before we go further, let's pause here, because today, especially in a culture divided by ideology and labels, we desperately need a framework for hard conversations. One principle that I learned during my undergrad that I want to introduce to this space is something called the principle of charity. In academic settings, the principle of charity asks us to engage with others' views in their strongest, most thoughtful form, not their weakest caricature. It teaches us to listen generously, to assume the best intentions where possible, and to respond to real meaning, not just to what triggers us. Jesus practiced something very close to this at the well. He didn't come to defeat her in debate. He came to dignify her humanity through conversation. That's the model we are aiming for here too. So let's talk about the conversation. This is the longest recorded conversation Jesus has with anyone in Scripture. And it's not with a Pharisee and not with a disciple. It's with her. He doesn't sidestep her pain or avoid the truth. He names it. You've had 5 husbands. But he doesn't weaponize it. Truth is spoken not to humiliate, but to reveal, to invite, to connect. She responds with honesty, not pretense. And in that moment, Jesus reveals what he hadn't told anyone else yet. I am the Messiah. That matters. He chose her, a woman whose story had likely disqualified her from many tables. He chose her, not despite her story, but because of it. Not despite her confusion, but because of her curiosity and her expectance. And she hadn't gone to seminary. She hadn't passed a doctrinal test. She simply met Jesus. And that was enough. This wasn't a theological debate or a spiritual lecture. It was a moment of holy disarming. As we read in John 4:27, the disciples are not present for this exchange. That's intentional. Some conversations need the safety of one-on-one. This kind of connection Jesus models is the opposite of the keyboard warrior mindset that we often see today, where quick judgments replace genuine conversation, and winning feels more important than understanding. Relationship equity is built through trust, and trust often begins in private, intimate spaces. The woman at the well had no formal theological education, but she had curiosity, she had history, she had pain. And Jesus met her there, not with shame, but with honor, not with accusation, but with questions that reached beyond comfort zones. He asked her for a drink. He flipped every expectation on its head. John 4:23-24 says, "But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." What Jesus is saying is radical. Worship, not tied to geography, tribe, or status. It's not about what mountain or temple you belong to. It's about spirit and truth. This is a severing of worship from systems of power and privilege. And that, friend, is the gospel. You see, Jesus doesn't sever us from who we are. He frees us from the burden of proving we deserve to belong. Jesus doesn't disconnect us from our identity. He frees us from the lie that only some identities get access to God. And that changes everything. And the Samaritan woman, even without credentials, recognizes something sacred is happening. She says, when the Messiah comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus responds, I who speak to you am he. What does that mean for us? It means hard conversations can be holy ground. It means we can speak truth without tearing others down. It means we lead with curiosity, not assumptions. It means we can break barriers, not each other. And it means that God meets our realness with his. This story teaches us to meet people where they are, not with quick, dismissive responses meant to silence discomfort or rigid beliefs enforced without compassion, but with dignity and presence. Jesus didn't fix everything in that moment. The disciples returned confused, even judgmental. The woman walked away without her circumstances changing, but her heart was transformed. She became a witness, a storyteller, and in that storytelling, an entire village found their way to the well. You see, I've known thirst. I've known what it feels like to long for something I couldn't name, only to find it in the most unexpected place through the most unexpected conversation. Like the Samaritan woman, I've stood in the in-between, between cultures, between languages, between marriages and dysfunctional generational patterns. I've judged what I didn't understand. I've wrestled with God's justice because it doesn't always look like mine. I've tried to prove I belong by performing my pain just right or hiding it completely. I've felt the shame and loneliness of being misunderstood. I've also felt the sacredness of being seen. And that's what happens when we dare to meet at the well with our questions, our brokenness, and our thirst. Like the Samaritan woman, I've been met by Jesus, just as I am. And now I get to share with you what I've found at the well. This story matters to me because I've been both the woman with the messy past and the disciple judging from a distance, unsure how Jesus could sit in the tension with such grace. Through their conversation, we see that Jacob's well was sacred to both Jews and Samaritans. This common ground is where Jesus chose to meet her, someone who checked all the do not engage boxes. She was a woman. She was born of questionable lineage. Her personal life was, well, complicated. But Jesus meets her with curiosity, not condemnation. He meets her at the well, and that's where I believe he meets us, not once we're cleaned up, but right in the middle. And that kind of sacred conversation, it echoes another meeting between God and an outsider woman, Hagar. That story is for a future episode, and I can't wait to have that conversation with you. I started Meet at the Well because I believe there's a place for you. Yes, you, right in the middle. In the questions, in the sacred discomfort. This podcast isn't here to give you all the answers. It's here to hold space for honest, healing dialogue, where truth doesn't destroy, it redeems, and where the hard middle isn't exile, it's encounter. I believe your story matters, even in the process, even in the pain, even if your circumstances have not changed. The Samaritan woman did not return to her village with her circumstances fixed that day. She didn't return with a new marriage or a clean reputation. But what she did return with was even more powerful. Freedom. Freedom to run back to the very people who had judged and shamed her. Freedom to tell her story. And somehow, something in her transformed, so much that the villagers listened. They came to see for themselves. What if it wasn't just her words, but her freedom they could not ignore? What would change if you stopped trying to fix everything before showing up? What if your story, unfinished, imperfect, is the beginning of someone else's freedom? What if we could have hard conversations the way Jesus did? Curious, honoring, direct, but never dehumanizing. That's the kind of theology we're building here. Woman at the Well Theology. Maybe you're in a season of waiting. Maybe you're caught in cultural tension or personal sorrow. Maybe you've been told you're too much, too broken, or too late. The Samaritan woman reminds us it's not too late to be met by Jesus. And it's never too late to tell others about what happens when you are. In a polarized world that wants us to pick sides, I want to offer something different. A space to honor each other's humanity. And this is just the beginning. In the episodes to come, we'll explore themes like dignity in disagreement, healing through story, reimagining justice, and holding faith in tension. You'll hear theology, poetry, and personal stories, sometimes just from me, sometimes with guests, always with honesty and always at the well. We're breaking barriers, not each other. So if your heart has been searching for a space to wrestle with hard questions and rediscover belonging in the in-between, you've found it. If this resonates with you, subscribe, follow, and share this first episode. And if you're ready to continue the conversation, head over to my Substack, where the well runs deeper. Until next time, come thirsty. You are welcome here.